Carmelo Anthony had a history involving fights, weapons, disturbing messages, allegations involving his girlfriend, and claims that he had been stalking her. Austin Metcalf, however, had his own history that almost nobody knew about, including racist incidents, repeated use of racial slurs, allegations of bullying, and violence toward female students, anger issues, school suspensions, and even an incident where he and another student were suspended after talking about bringing a gun to school the next day. And some of the details were even more extreme than that. Court documents show Austin and his brother were once caught spray painting graffiti that included KKK, Kill All Blacks, Heil Hitler, and the N-word, an incident that resulted in 12 months of juvenile probation. And none of this was shown to the jury. Now, despite the things that we're going to talk about in this video, based on my own moral standards, I can't really say that Austin's death was justified. But this does dramatically change what we know about both teenagers going into that confrontation. So basically, we've gotten a bunch of new information about the murder case involving Carmelo Anthony and Austin Metcalf. And this information is actually really substantial because we're now learning a lot more about who both of these teenagers were before that confrontation ever happened. This situation, of course, dates back to April 2025, when Carmelo and Austin got into a confrontation underneath a tent at a high school track meet in Frisco, Texas. Carmelo stabbed Austin during that confrontation. Austin died from his injuries, and Carmelo later argued that he acted in self-defense. The case eventually went to trial. Carmelo was convicted of murder and he was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Now, this new part of the story is extremely important for a few different reasons. First of all, the background of both Carmelo and Austin were intentionally kept away from the jury because the prosecution and the defense had what has been described as a gentleman's agreement. Now, for anyone who doesn't know what that means, just in simple terms, that basically means both sides agreed we're not going to bring up all the bad things we have about your guy as long as you don't bring up all the bad things you have about ours. And the idea is basically to stop the trial from turning into a debate over who Carmelo and Austin were as people, and instead force the jury to focus specifically on what happened underneath that tent when Austin was killed. So the jury that ultimately convicted Carmelo never heard this broader history about either of them. And now that Carmelo is trying to get a new trial, this entire agreement has basically been pulled into the spotlight, and we're finally finding out exactly what both sides have been sitting on. So I want to start with Austin Metcalf, because during the actual murder trial, the overwhelming focus was naturally on Carmelo and his actions. Austin's background, on the other hand, was something the jury and really the public knew very little about, and some of what has now been revealed is pretty significant and might actually change the way you look at this entire case. And by the end of this video, I'll tell you whether it changed my mind. Now, this is everything we know about the past of Austin Metcalf. One of the earliest incidents that has now been revealed dates all the way back to 2018, while Austin was still in elementary school. According to court documents, Austin and his twin brother Hunter were accused of bullying and assaulting a female student, and the incident reportedly led to Austin being arrested. A few years later, in 2021, Austin was banned from attending basketball games for an entire season after yelling profanity at a player. And then as Austin got older, there were several more incidents documented through his school and juvenile records. At some point, Austin and his brother Hunter were caught spray painting racist graffiti that included the words KKK, Kill All Blacks, Heil Hitler, along with the N-word. According to the court records discussed during the hearing, the brothers were sentenced to 12 months of juvenile probation over that incident. Records also reportedly show several separate instances of Austin using racial slurs at school. And in 2023, Austin was accused of bullying a black student inside of a classroom. Then in 2024, there was another alleged incident involving a female student. According to reports, Austin got into an argument with her, allegedly knocked her to the ground, and punched her in the stomach. There are also issues surrounding his behavior at sporting events. Austin was reportedly kicked out of a football game and later texted somebody saying, "I was about to beat the out of those kids." And interestingly enough, there was also an incident at a previous track meet. According to court documents, another student told Austin that somebody who wasn't on their team was behind their bench talking wild. Austin reportedly responded, "Kill that MF, aka motherfucker." During the 2023-2024 school year, Austin received in-school suspension twice. Disciplinary records from 2022 through 2024 also reportedly show him using profanity toward teachers, including calling one teacher the B word. At one point, Austin apparently told a school official that he couldn't control what he was saying and wasn't even aware that it was coming out of his mouth. And in 2024, records show that Austin met with a counselor on at least 5 separate occasions regarding his anger and rage during football. There was also another school suspension involving something potentially much more serious. Court documents state that Austin and another student were talking about bringing a gun to school the following day, and Austin was suspended as a result. So when you put all of this together, the picture being revealed now is obviously very different from what the jury and really the public knew about Austin during the murder trial. And again, some of these incidents are allegations, while others come from documented school records, police reports, and juvenile court records. None of this means Austin deserved what happened to him, and just from my own moral standpoint, I just really cannot justify it mentally in my head that he deserved to die. That's just my opinion. But it does explain why this newly revealed history has become such a major part of the conversation surrounding Carmelo Anthony's attempt to get a new trial. So now that we have the history of Austin Metcalf out the way, let's get into Carmelo Anthony. And when it comes to Carmelo, prosecutors actually had an even larger amount of material that the jury never heard. According to CBS News Texas, prosecutors produced a roughly 75-page filing detailing incidents, messages, and allegations stretching back through Carmelo's teenage years. Some of the earliest material dates back to when Carmelo was attending school in Louisiana. In 2021, Carmelo reportedly told a friend that he had been suspended from school for 3 days after getting into a fight. In the messages, he allegedly said that school officials had warned him that if something happened again, he could be recommended for expulsion. And basically that means the school was warning him that another serious disciplinary incident could result in him being removed from the school entirely. There were also messages from that same year in which Carmelo and another student allegedly discussed robbing somebody for $300. And as the year went on, prosecutors say there were multiple messages showing Carmelo talking openly about fighting. In one conversation with his girlfriend after he moved to Frisco, she apparently suggested that he should just sit down and relax for a while. Carmelo allegedly responded by saying, "Yeah, and punch people, maybe run sometimes," before adding, "I have to, it's like a priority for me, and I like punching people." In that same series of messages, prosecutors say Carmelo wrote, "When I get mad, I see red. When I get mad, I black out. And when I get mad, I can't control myself." There are also messages where prosecutors say Carmelo admitted on at least 2 occasions to punching girls in the face, along with another conversation where he described hitting somebody so hard that he eventually had to stop fighting. Then in 2023, prosecutors found another set of disturbing messages. In one conversation, Carmelo allegedly told a friend, "I'ma shoot the school up tomorrow, and with my blick," which is a slang for gun. However, this part is important because Carmelo later followed those messages by saying that he would never actually do that. That same year, prosecutors say he also messaged somebody about vandalizing a person's house in Austin, Texas, writing that he had a grudge against them. By 2024, the messages begin involving weapons even more frequently. Prosecutors say Carmelo told a friend before attending a party that he would have a gun in his pocket. There was also an exchange concerning the State Fair of Texas, where Carmelo allegedly asked whether the fair had metal detectors. After being asked whether he had the poker, Carmelo reportedly replied, "Yeah, I might have to toss it." Prosecutors also say there were messages suggesting that Carmelo had brought weapons onto a school campus. In one message describing an incident involving his girlfriend going into his bag, Carmelo allegedly wrote that, "My gun and my knife and some other stuff fell out." Authorities also reportedly recovered photographs and videos showing Carmelo holding firearms, as well as other messages in which he discussed weapons. Prosecutors also revealed some material involving Carmelo's relationship with his girlfriend. According to the filing, prosecutors say Carmelo reportedly threatened her in text messages. One alleged message asked, "How many bullets you want coming out of your chest?" And prosecutors say there were also messages involving threats with a knife. They also referenced a message in which Carmelo allegedly talked about stabbing somebody and licking the blood off the blade. Then we get to April 2nd, 2025, the same day Austin Metcalf was killed. At around 1 a.m., prosecutors say Carmelo sent a message saying, "I'm low-key on a verge." And later that morning, only hours before the confrontation at the track meet, prosecutors say Carmelo's girlfriend went to a staff member at Centennial High School and reported that Carmelo had been engaging in what she described as stalking behavior, including allegedly driving past her home and refusing to allow her to end their relationship. Hours later, Carmelo and Austin would come into contact underneath that tent at the track meet, leading to the confrontation that ended with Austin being fatally stabbed. So just like with Austin, the jury never heard this broader history about Carmelo either. They were shown this broader collection of messages, allegations, school incidents, or references to weapons, and that's really the key to understanding the so-called gentleman's agreement. Both sides had information that could make the other teenager look extremely bad in front of a jury. Carmelo's defense had Austin's behavioral history, and prosecutors had roughly 75 pages worth of material concerning Carmelo. So both sides ultimately agreed to keep this broader character evidence away from the jury and make the murder trial about one specific question: what actually happened underneath that tent on April 2nd, 2025. So those are basically the two sides that we have as far as the newly revealed information about both Carmelo and Austin. And as you guys could hear, this was pretty bad on both sides in my opinion. Now here's what I'm going to say about this. I think this new information, in my opinion, probably looks way more worse on Austin. And the reason I say that is because Austin was a person who lost his life. I still don't think what happened to him was right, and none of this history means that he deserved to be killed. But because Austin was the victim, the largest part of the public conversation naturally became an analysis of Carmelo Anthony. He was the person on trial, his behavior, his mindset, and whether he had a history that could help explain what happened that day. And for that specific reason, a lot of Austin's background simply wasn't part of the conversation in the same way. And this actually brings up another interesting part of the case, because people online had been speculating about the histories of both teenagers for a long time. Now, during my own coverage, I intentionally stayed away from a lot of that speculation. With Austin, he was the victim. But here's the thing about Carmelo: because he was the person who stabbed Austin and eventually got convicted of murder, people naturally hyper-focused on Carmelo's behavior. There were all kinds of claims online that he had some violent past, that he was obsessed with weapons, or that this whole thing had somehow been premeditated. But at the time, the public simply didn't have enough verified information to know how much of that was actually true. And there's another layer to this too, especially when we're talking about how black people are sometimes portrayed in the media and online. There's a tendency for the media and the public a lot of times to take the worst possible image of a black person and let that become the entire story before all the facts are even known. And whether people admit that bias or not, it can absolutely shape the way a case like this gets discussed. So that was another reason I didn't want to lean too heavily into rumors about Carmelo's past without actual evidence. But now we actually have something concrete to evaluate on both sides. We're getting school records, police reports, court documents, and cell phone messages that give us a much clearer picture of both Carmelo and Austin's background than we had before. And that's why I think the Austin information hits differently. It's not necessarily because his history was objectively worse than Carmelo's. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we also found out about Carmelo were extremely disturbing and pretty bad too. But because this is a side of Austin that the public basically never saw during the original case, it just makes Austin look way worse in contrast. And of course, we have the racial bias in his case. You know, a black teenager kills a white teenager. And a lot of people were basically arguing before we had all the information that the reason why Carmelo killed Austin was because he was getting bullied. And then now there's stories here and allegations that basically paint Austin as that kind of person. So of course, now it's going to change a lot of people's perspective and perception of it from that perspective. But here's the thing I want to say, right? When somebody is the victim of a crime, especially when that person actually loses their life, it's naturally harder for people to imagine that they may also have had serious problems themselves. So whether we're talking about flaws or a history that could make them look bad, the fact that someone became a victim can a lot of times almost like freeze them in the public's mind as only that, a victim. But being the victim in one specific situation doesn't automatically tell you everything about what that person was before it happened. And learning more about Austin's background forces you to separate those two things. So I think for me, what this changes isn't that I suddenly look at the situation and think Austin being killed was justified. I just don't. What it does change is how I view Austin himself as a person. Based on these records, he wasn't simply this completely innocent kid with no troubling history whatsoever. There were repeated instances of racist language against black people, right? Allegations of violence toward females, including one report where he allegedly knocked a female student to the ground and punched her in the stomach. Accusations of bullying, repeated disciplinary problems, and other behavior that the public simply didn't know about. And I think that's really the biggest shift here. This case became less about a completely innocent person on one side and a completely troubled person on the other, and more about two teenagers who both appear to have had serious issues before they ever crossed paths underneath that tent. So this whole revelation definitely changes my mind, not about the outcome of what happened, but more about how I view the people involved. When it comes to Carmelo, honestly though, I will say this, there honestly wasn't much I could have learned that would have made me view what he ultimately did as more serious than what already happened. Because Carmelo took another person's life, for me personally, that's the most extreme thing that Carmelo could have already done. He took a life. For me, that's the worst of the worst that a person can eventually just like do. So hearing Carmelo's past doesn't suddenly make the actual killing feel worse than it already was. Austin is different because he was the victim here. So the public naturally knew him mainly through that lens of being the victim. But now we're finding out that he also had a history involving racist behavior, allegations of violence, bullying, disciplinary issues, and other conduct that was never part of the public image before. So that's really what changed things for me, at least. Now, whether Austin deserved what happened, again, I don't think he did, but the idea that this was simply one completely innocent teenager on one side and one troubled teenager on the other side, the reality of that is now basically gone, publicly at least. But anyway, that's just my opinion, and of course, I'm here to give you guys the information, and then you can decide what you think. Of course, I'm always going to share my honest opinion as well. So I'm curious what you guys think about this. This is information that we simply didn't know before. So I want to ask you a question. Does any of this change the way you look at the case? Does it change how you view Carmelo, Austin, or neither of them? Really want to hear what you guys have to say, so let me know in the comments. If you made it this far, drop a like on this video and subscribe if you're new here. My name is Blackie Speaks. Nice to meet you. Appreciate you guys for watching like always, and hopefully you guys have a good Friday, and I'll catch you guys on the next video. Peace. I'm out.